Hello, everyone. Welcome to week three of sports journalism. This is a pre-recorded lecture this week because I'm traveling. I'm in New Orleans at the Online News Association conference doing some technical trainings down there for a group of journalists. It'll be my 24th trip to New Orleans. And there are a lot of times cover Sugar Bowls, Rams Saints games, all kinds of crazy stuff over the years. A lot of conferences too. A wonderful city. It's been through a lot, with the hurricanes and everything, but a lot of spirit there and a lot of really good times. And I'll tell you, no city knows hospitality better than New Orleans. They've been through a lot, ranging from those hurricanes all the way up to the terrorist attack just last year. So we don't have a live class meeting this week, but I did want to, kind of walk you through some things about covering a ball game. And I talked about it a little bit in week two when we had our guest speakers in. And I just want to kind of go over everything with you before you go out and cover a game this week. It's really the fundamental thing a sports writer needs to know. If you can't cover a game and understand what's going on the field, and then write a concise story about it that gives the basic nuts and bolts of what happened to the reader, yeah, that's really where everything begins for a sports journalist. If you can't do that, you can't really do the job. I mean, it's a necessity. And going out to games is many times where I got my best story ideas, and I met people and got to know people in not just the prep sports world, but college sports world, pro sports, whatever. I was covering. That's where I networked and got to know people. And it helped later on when I might need to make a phone call to them in the off season and get a question answered quickly. So, it's a good networking opportunity, but you're there to focus on what's going on the game. You're not there to cheer in the press box or, hang out and have fun. Another little thing about going to cover a sports event. Don't do what I've got on right now. I've got on, a Bears a little shirt on. You don't wear team gear to cover sports events. So try and dress professionally. Just wear stuff without logos on it. I mean, if it has a Nike logo, that's fine or something like that. But try not to wear team gear to a sports event. Try to look professional. So at home, out at school, whatever, wear whatever you want. So, but that's just a little tip. That and no cheering in the press box either. We also don't accept gifts from sources either. That's something that we talked about in Ethics Week last or 2 weeks ago. Is not accepting gifts, autographs, things like that from even if you're asking for someone else. You just don't do that. It's not considered professional. So this is our week three syllabus schedule down at the bottom of our syllabus. This video is in your week three folder that you're watching right now. The slide deck I'm going to go through is linked right here. It's also in your week three folder. In the week two folder is elements of writing a good game story, which is kind of summarized in the slide deck, but it's a good handout. It's got a little more detail in it. And also the basic AP game story and notebook examples. And I'll talk a little bit about the game story examples and notebooks in a little bit. I'll walk you through them again. And then we'll have you start on your assignment, which is due next week. It'll be due, I believe, the 15th of September. If this is a class other than the fall 2025 sports journalism class, you might have a little different deadline. So let's go ahead. Now that we've kind of walked through what we're going to do here, let's get after it. This little slideshow, I actually used AI to help write some of this or to build some of this. The handout, I took that and loaded it into ChatGPT and Claude and had it break down and build the individual slides based on what it read in the handout. Then I had to create a couple of images, and when you see here is AI generated. You can see there's no logo on his jersey. The skin tones, are a little off. Pretty easy to tell that it's an AI generated image. But, it was a fun way. I wanted to teach myself how to build slideshows in AI, and hey, why not do it this way? The content's all from me or from research that I've done. So, what are the elements of writing a game story in a notebook? Sometimes your notebooks are separate. The way we're going to do them in this class, we just add our notebook or notes at the end of the game story. The notebook items are just little, tidbits, who the teams play next, maybe a key injury or something like that, or a funny quote, or something quirky or weird that happened during the game that didn't have like a huge impact on the game, but it's just something kind of interest. And I'll show you some of those examples in a little bit. So let's get after some of the basic elements. As I talk about in the handout, writing a good game story is both art and science. The science being in that they're very structured, almost formulaic in how you write some of them, especially a basic AP style lead, which I'll show you in a minute. But the art of it is really knowing what's going on in the game, being able to find that fine little detail and know something maybe that your competitor, if somebody else is covering the game and writing against you, so to speak, to think of something like an angle or a statistic or something you get in that story that no one else has. I was often the last person to ever leave a locker room when I was off covering games. I'd often go in on the player's day off if I was covering, a pro beat or a college beat like the LA Rams or something like that. I would hang out on the player's off day, and they would come in for treatment. And many times I would interview them or catch them after they were coming out of treatment and ask questions like, hey, what's wrong with your ankle? Are you going to be able to play Sunday? That type of stuff. So always stay a little later than everybody else. I would always wait everyone else out. So in the era of instant highlights, I mean, you can get highlights from a game on your phone almost instantaneously from pro and college events, high school even. They're posted and shared over social media, right away at halftime of the game and then again at the end. So as a sports journalist, somebody that's there writing about the story, and document it maybe with a photo and video and maybe some audio from the post game interview. We have to offer more than just the score. We need to provide that context and insight into what happened. Why did the game end this way? That's typically the angle you're working with. Was there a key injury in the game? Was it a strategic mistake by a coach? Was it Tyreek Stevenson running down the field, not paying attention at the end of the game when a Hail Mary pass was in the air? So you just never know what's going to happen during a game and how it's going to play out. There are many times I start writing my lead in the fourth quarter or in the eighth or ninth inning of a game, and something wacky would happen at the end, and it would change everything. So you can prepare to cover a game, but you never can predict what's going to happen in a game. There's always some quirky little thing that can happen. Pre-game preparation, though, is very important. Before you go and cover, the teams always know their team or school nicknames, the coaches' names, how to spell the coach and player names. Know the basics going in. Know the team records, any streaks that they have. Maybe somebody's lost 3 or 4 games in a row or won 4 in a row. Any key stats. Maybe it's one of the highest scoring football teams in the state, or one of the it's an undefeated volleyball team that's won their first 6 and hasn't lost a match in 2 years. So maybe, excuse me, some stat like that. Remember too, if they're playing a league game, it might be kind of early in the year for that. Know where the teams stand in their overall league and league and overall records are. So a team might be 6-0 overall, 1-0 in the Sunset League Conference or whatever, or Sunset Conference or whatever it is. Use official team websites to background information on the teams and players. Always check the number of games played because sometimes those team websites don't always get updated right away with stats and data. Pro and college they do, but the high schools sometimes take a little longer. Example, know the leading rusher, scorer, passer, and receiver on each team if you're going to cover a football game. That can also lead to a really cool expansion on your stats at the end of the game. If you come in with the state's leading rusher, averaging 117 yards a game, and that player's held to 24 yards rushing in the game, that's something you want to mention because the opposing team, really shut him down defensively, and you want to talk to the coaches about why that was the case, or maybe the player was injured or something. So, knowing those basic stats going in is a good thing to know. Very important. So come prepared. I always show up at least a half hour before a game, just to make sure I get settled in. If it's a high school game, check in with the press box if there's room up there. They'll let you sit down, explain that, hey, I'm a UIC student. I'm, here writing a game story off the event. Do you have any room in the press box? And more often than not, if they have a room, they're going to give you some space. If not, find a seat that's fairly up high so you can see the action pretty well. Volleyball and stuff like that, I would sit down a little closer, kind of behind the scorers table, the announcers table. Many times you can hear what the coaches are saying. I do that with basketball too. Also, you can check in with the stat keepers after the game too. Sometimes it's an official score. They'll share the stats with you after the game, and you can just jot them down in a notebook. Always have a notebook. Of course, your phone, have that fully charged. So you can record any interview after the game. So some basic tips, once you get there and you're all settled in and you're watching the game, keep track of, maybe a key run in the game. Volleyball, oftentimes you see, 10-0 runs, things like that. Football, maybe somebody takes a 14-0 lead in the first quarter. All of a sudden they're down 21-14 at the end of the third quarter, So keep track of those runs, and we call them runs in a game. Same in baseball, somebody has a 7-run seventh inning, you might want to note that in the story. So include the score and a key stat within the first three paragraphs of the story. That's required. Maybe somebody scored 3 touchdowns and the team won, 28-21. That would probably be your lead paragraph. And then focus on the main factor that influenced the outcome. Maybe it was a coaching decision, an injury, maybe one standout performance, but what caused this event to happen? Why did it turn out this way? If it's an upset, say it's an upset. And, if a low-ranked team in the state upsets a high-ranked team in the state, call it an upset. Not an upset victory because that's redundant, but just call it an upset. But if it's the 7th-ranked team beats a 6th-ranked team, that's not a big upset. It's fairly closely ranked. Avoid narrating the game from beginning of the event to the end, unless it's just kind of start near the end of the game. That's what I put pretty high in the story. What happened in the fourth quarter, or in the last set of the volleyball match? That's what people want to read about. And then, mention later, almost you do it in reverse chronological order. You write your game stories and sprinkling quotes from the, coach and player after the game that, helps explain and helps the reader understand what happened. And again, identify any key lead changes or long plays, long touchdown run, a big rally in volleyball, something like that. That's just the fundamentals that you want to get in your story. Key elements, I mentioned these fairly high in the story, typically the third to, fifth paragraph. Mention any records broken or milestones reached. Maybe sometimes somebody became the state's all-time leading passer in football in the game. That's something you want to have pretty high in this story. Clearly state who won the game and the final score. Winning score first. So, if Maine South beat Ridgewood 21-14, you wouldn't say 14-21. It's always, the winning score first with the winning team first. So it's clear to the reader who won. And it's so important. So many times I see game stories where the score is mentioned 6-7 paragraphs in. No, you want to get the score up high because people still want to see the result, but they want to know the context around that result. I do try to insert a quote from a player or coach in the first 4 or 5 paragraphs too. If I don't have a record broken or anything like that, it'll typically be around the 3rd or 4th paragraph. So, just gives me a little, kind of burst of energy in this story, in the, catching them after the game and getting that instant reaction. And, use good quotes, oh man, I'm really happy we won. Who cares about that? But, we were very motivated going into this game because we lost to this team 4 years in a row. And, we were primed for an upset. That's a decent quote from players, or have them talk about a key play in the game, ask the coach about that. When writing and structuring the story, keep the paragraph short, no more than 3 sentences per paragraph. Include both teams' records overall and in conference or league play. Place quotes into their own paragraphs and use this format for attribution. We play like garbage today, comma, close quote. Coach Leroy said. He's my old junior varsity basketball coach. and then say they dominated us in every aspect. Now, the quote could continue on for a few more sentences, but this is just a short one. You always put the attribution after the first natural pause, and then on second, third, fourth, and fifth reference, you would just say sang said rather than Coach Leroy. You just identify him on the first reference. Now, it might be in a paragraph before that. Coach Leroy saying was really upset after the game, period. We played like garbage today, Singh said. They dominated us in every aspect. Always use said as attribution, not acknowledged, bellowed, chided, or anything. Just say said. That's what they said. Not says as in present tense, but past tense said. We're writing in past tense because we're there as observers of the game. Sometimes you're the paper of record. If it's the newspaper or the news outlet that's the largest is typically what they call the paper of record for covering that game. So it's important to be accurate. It's important to write the story clearly. It's very important because people read this stuff. It's very important. Man, you don't want an angry phone call from a parent after the game. Oh my God, you spelled my kid's name wrong. That's why we double check the spellings of the names. Even if they're in the program, double check. Sometimes there's typos in them. I always double check them against the website. A little bit more on using quotes effectively. Don't try to stack them all at the end. Insert them as you address related topics in the story. So maybe it's a quote from the coach at the top, near the top of the story, third, fourth paragraph, talking about what it really means to the team, and then to win the game. But then later in the story, maybe it's a coach talking about a key strategy or some preparation they did in practice that week for a trick play that influenced the outcome of the game, that type of thing. And look for the oddity in stories. Look for those offbeat trick plays, things like that might have made a difference. Balance a story with interviews from the coaches. Try to get both teams if you can, and at least one's player, sometimes two, if it was a key play, a key touchdown pass, you might want to get a quote or two from the quarterback and the receiver, that type of thing. Discuss strategy and key plays with the coaches and players. What made the difference today? I saw you guys switch to a two deep zone in the third quarter. The rest of the game was a shutout. Was it something you noticed on film or something you noticed in the first half of the game, coach, that caused you to make that switch? Don't use questions like, "Oh, tell me about this," or "Tell me about this play." The better way to come at a coach or a player is on the winning play, what was the strategy going in, and was that the exact route the receiver was supposed to run? Was there a broken play in any way? Can you tell me a little more detail what happened? So, give them more than just, or sometimes I've even done this. Walk me through the last play. What were you thinking as you dropped back to throw the ball? That's always an open slate for the quarterback to walk you through what they did. Or what was your reaction when this happened in the game, and what adjustment did you make to fix it? That's a good coach question. So those are just kind of generic questions. Kind of depends on what happens in the game. If it's a 52-0 final score in football, you're not going to walk up to the losing coach and ask those types of questions. It's going to be, where do you go from here? This was obviously, how's team morale after this, and where do you guys go from here? I'd usually start off with that, especially if it's just a crushing defeat like that. I've had a few of those. I've had games where teams have lost by 60, 70 points, and it's just they're downtrodden afterwards. But you approach them. Hey, I just have a couple quick questions. I know this was a tough night, but I've got a couple questions I need to ask you. And they're always open to that. They're professionals are paid to deal with you as a journalist, and they know that. They face the music. More often than not. I've had a few, cry about it and walk away. So anyway, try to end the story with a quote that kind of summarizes the game. Maybe it's a quote from a player or one of the coaches. It's always a good way to end kind of that main story. And then you can get into things like the notebook, which we'll talk about in a minute. You just tag that onto the end, the notebook. That's what I always did when I covered the Cubs, the Trib at the time. We just dropped our notes at the end of our game stories. Sometimes we broke them out as separate stories, but usually they were just a little notebook collection at the end of the story. Editing and accuracy. Spend twice as much time editing your story as you did writing it. It's an old saying in journalism: write drunk and edit sober, meaning you can write the story typically pretty fast. But the editing process, going back and double checking the final score, double checking the player stats, the player names, the quotes, Take that extra time to edit for accuracy. Getting it right is more important than getting it done first. Yeah, people will remember you for getting the story wrong. They don't necessarily remember you for getting it right, but they will remember you for getting the story wrong. And if you're inaccurate and you get scores wrong, stats wrong, player names wrong, your credibility goes out the window pretty quickly. So be accurate. And use the sports guidelines in the AP style book. It's in your reading for this week. It's about 7, 8 pages, I think. But one of the reasons we had you buy the AP style book or buy it online, so you can look up things like how to record a score, how to record player statistics. Do I spell out if a player scored 8 points in basketball? Do I use the number 8 or spell out 8? So those are the types of things that the AP style books can help you with that. So make sure you've read through those before you start to sit down and write your story. How do you write a lead? How do you format a story? Here's a good example of a structured AP lead story. I used to write a lot of these in college because I'd string for the Associated Press doing Nebraska basketball games, and they'd pay you to go out, keep the stats, watch the game, and you also got stats from the team, from the sports information director. You don't have that always in high school. You have to go to the stat keepers. I would always keep the stats, and then know the key lead changes, things like that, and then double check my data against the official box score data that the sports information director would bring around. And for AP, we'd write, just a basic lead like this and get all the key facts from the game, a lot of statistics up high. And then, you can always work in some quotes here. This example doesn't have a quote till about the 6th or 7th paragraph, a little low for this one. But this is a regular season game. The Cubs had lost the first 2 games in Minneapolis to the Twins. But they came back, PCA hit a couple homers. In fact, this is the day that I'm doing this training, so this lead's actually from today. Notice the details. Very simple sentence. Pete Crow Armstrong hit 2 home runs, and for his 5th multi-homer game this season. That's a pretty important stat. 5 multi-homer games halfway through the season is a pretty interesting statistic. Powering the Chicago Cubs past the Minnesota Twins 8-1 on Thursday. And then it just has a little thing on some background and some key information, about Crow Armstrong. He was having his breakout season. He's on the All-Star team. He went 3 for 4 in the games and scored 3 runs with 3 RBIs. That's pretty good numbers to help the Cubs avoid a 3-game sweep. So he weaved in, the AP writer here, weaved in, kind of a key overall stat. Now, he knew this going in, that the Cubs had lost the first 2 games of the series, so they avoided being swept. Dateline Minneapolis, you always put the dateline of whatever city you're in. You don't have to put AP in it because you're not an AP writer. Then it got into Colin Ray, who threw a pretty good game. He won 3 starts in a row. He knew that it was 2 in a row coming in. Threw a 3-hitter over 7 innings. That was his season high, so he knew that stat. The reporter really did his homework, too. And because Michael Busch was playing in Minnesota, he's from there. He mentioned Minnesota native Michael Busch added 2 RBIs. Then also, a little bit about Ray, and he's 35 years old, and it's his longest start since August 18th last year. And then mentioned a little key moment in the game that when Dansby Swanson helped give them their lead, and then they just kind of pulled away. It was an 8-1 blowout. But just the basic facts, all those details and stats. A lot of it background information that he weaved in to the story. This is a reporter that came very prepared to cover this game. The problem with AP reporters, oftentimes they don't get bylines in their story, just says AP. So normally you'll have your byline at the top, by Mike Reilley, no colon, but by, and then your name. That's how it works. So this might be a good approach for your game assignment that you're going to go out and do this week. Pretty clean, straightforward approach. Work in a quote or 2. I might have worked in, a quote from PCA. I don't know, maybe he wasn't talking or something, but I would have dropped in a quote probably right under here. It was rare for Crow Armstrong because he's pretty loquacious. He loves to talk after a game, before a game, and during a game. But I would drop it in right here with him and then get into Colin Ray stuff. But that's just a personal preference. Anecdotally, this is a little different approach to a game story, and maybe it's something you want to approach. The interesting thing about this lead is it takes the reader into the coach's office after the game. Kind of shows the impact of the game and the big win. If the reader saw the game, take them where they can't go. We have access to players and coaches after games, especially locker room. Sometimes I wrote lead of my stories about a player half tearing apart a locker room after the game. We had this once after a Thursday night football game in the NFL. One of the players attacked another player on his own team with a folding chair, like something out of wrestling, because he blamed the loss on him. He got torched for he was a cornerback that got torched for 3 touchdown passes by Andre Bad Moon Rison back in the day, and he attacked him with his own teammate with a chair. That became the lead. That's what the whole story was about. Was what the fans didn't see after the TV was turned off. So this one example here was a coach from Charleston High School. Brad Oakley sat in a chair typing into his cell phone. Sorry, he said, finishing a text. He's talking to the reporter. His phone was lighting up 20 minutes after Friday night's game. Get a lot more texts when we win than when we lose, he said. It's nice to get a win tonight. An hour earlier, so the reporter's just kind of hanging out talking to him after the game. They had this wild 4-point victory over cross county rival Mattoon, and then it goes into a little bit more about the game. Then, so this is one of those anecdotal leads, that kind of scene setter leads. Maybe it's a scene setter anecdotal lead is something that happened during the game. And then drop the score into the third paragraph. But just kind of a different approach, more of kind of almost a feature story approach to the game. So either one of these type approaches is acceptable. Either one works. I mean, if you take a look at the straight AP lead has a lot of stats in it. Here the stats came much later. Well past the third paragraph where the score was introduced. So those are a couple of examples of how you can approach your game story. After the end of the story, once you're done writing your game story, place game notes at the end. Maybe an example brief note about upcoming games for both teams. Next week this team plays this team, and this team plays this team. What's next for them? Examples of game notes can be found at the end of the AP game examples in the week 2 folder. And I'm going to call those up right now because I want you to look at them. I think I talked about them in last week's class, but if I didn't, we're seeing them for the first time. This is a game story from the Celtics. Took it to the Warriors. They beat the Warriors by large amounts. They beat them by 50 in another game a couple years ago. But this one was about a 40-point win that they had over the Warriors. Is the Warriors' worst loss at home to a team in 40 years, which is a pretty key stat. And here, it has a date line, all the stuff about the game. And down here is the notebook. This is a very short story. There's just a few key points. And then the takeaways are down here. And, it has 2 key stats about each team. A key moment in the game, there was a long span where the Warriors didn't score 7.5 minutes. Hard to believe with Stephen Curry on the, I almost said Stephon Marbury, Stephen Curry on the, be accurate, on the court. And then a key stat, a number that was critical to the game. So it's a little different, than the first game story we looked at with the Cubs. This one kind of spread some of the stats and stuff throughout the little notebook here. And then up next is, where the teams play next. The second example, oh boy, is this one going to hurt? This is more of an anecdotal game story lead. When Jaden Daniels threw the Hail Mary and beat the Bears. You guys remember that? Second paragraph quote. As your quarterback was dropping back, this is an anecdote from the game. What was he thinking as he dropped back to throw the ball? Buy some time and don't throw the ball out of bounds. It's kind of an interesting perspective. And then, all the other quotes and stats and lead changes and things like that. And then down at the end, there's a few injury notes and things like that. And they just use these little subheads, these little bold-faced subheads to introduce the little notes items at the end. This game story ended with a really nice quote from Brian Robinson Jr., their running back with the Commanders, talking about his quarterback, a rookie quarterback. So that's how you could put notes at the end of a game. Maybe your game doesn't have anything really noteworthy outside of what you put in your game story, but usually there is something you can slip down there in the notes. Very rarely did I ever have game I covered where there wasn't a notebook item. So my final points, you want to show up prepared, show up at least 30 minutes before the game, and stay observant during the game. You pay attention, don't be distracted by, the band and things like that. There's a lot of other stuff going on. Focus on what sets your story apart from instant highlights. You give context and perspective that you at the event can see that maybe somebody that's watching on TV or is watching a highlight on their phone can't see. And always strive for accuracy, context, and just compelling storytelling. Sports tend to be very dramatic. Even sometimes in blowouts, they're very dramatic, and so it can lead to some really interesting story telling. So your next steps are to find a game to cover this week, background the teams and the key players. Think about what's at stake, records, streaks, or standings. Make arrangements to attend the game, gather stats, interviews, etc. at the game, and then head home and write. I would recommend writing right after the game. As soon as you get home, maybe it's an hour or two, but that way it's fresh in your head, and at least write the first draft of it then. And then go back over and edit it right away, and then maybe come back, the next day. You don't have to, send it in to me that night, but it's not due till the, September 15th for the fall 2025 class. So, take your time with it and make sure you do a good job. Double check those names because I will be. I always look up and fact check your work, and that's a big part of my job, and I take that very seriously. Remember too, in our week 2 folder, we have the elements of writing a good game story. It has some additional examples and suggestions beyond what I just covered in the slideshow. So make sure sure that you've read through that thoroughly, as well as the sports guidelines in the AP style book, those 7-8 pages that you need to read on that. And look over those game examples. Hopefully you don't have a 40-point blowout in your game. Hopefully you have one more like an exciting Hail Mary pass at the end of the game, something that comes down to the last second in the game. Those are the most fun to write about. And then they cover a sports story assignment, a sports event assignment. Try to make sure that it's a high school or college event that you can attend live. You do need to be at the event to do the reporting. You can watch it on TV and just take, a quote from the Bears coach after the game and slap it in the story. You need to go out to the game. And you're going to write, 200 to 300 words. It doesn't need to be a long story, kind of like the examples I gave you there. Shoot for that length. You can go a little over 300. I'm not a big word count guy. You'll learn that about me throughout the semester. So if you write 350 or 400, that's fine. But don't write 100 or don't write, 2,000 words on the game. Try to keep it close to this 200 to 300 range because writing concisely is hard. As Mark Twain once said, give me more time and I'll write you a shorter letter. So you want to be concise in your writing. Before starting the assignment, review those elements in the AP story examples and the AP guidelines, AP style book guidelines. And do the background, put a headline on your story. I gave you a couple of examples here. Put your sport first, and then the result. Whoever beat whoever. Maybe it's a player in there. Smith scores 3 times to lead Mount Prospect past Rolling Meadows, 31-28. Try to shoot a photo from the game. If you can get close enough to maybe zoom in and get a decent photo. Try to include that in your post as well. And what you'll do is when you send it to me by Monday, September 15th at 9 a.m., you can turn it in before that. I have to go through and edit it. I tend to turn these pretty quickly within 24 hours. Just email it to me as a Google Doc. Don't post it in your Medium account quite yet. I want to have a pass at it. So either send it to me as an editable Google Doc or a Microsoft Word document. Don't post them in Medium until I've made an edit on them and given you a grade. Then you can always post them in your Medium because you want to have your game story as a work sample to show, if you're applying for a job or an internship down the road. And you have many other projects from this class as well that you'll be able to feature in there. An in-depth story at the end of the semester. We have some good multimedia and graphic assignments too, working with some statistics. They're a lot of fun. They'll make for fine examples. And by the time you're done at the end of the semester, you'll have a nice little portfolio of sports journalism. And that's what the purpose of this class is, walking out of here having a really nice portfolio. And two, some of our better work throughout the semester, probably not so much the game stories, but the project work that we'll do toward the end of the semester. This is redlineproject.news, where our students in my UIC classes publish. We can go here under the sports vertical. It's down there in the lower right-hand corner. You can see the link, and you can get to the page. And we've got a few stories up here from my past digital and data classes. And most of them have been about the White Sox or Bears Stadium, or some stats on the White Sox, or stats on the Blackhawks salaries, and Caleb Williams rookie stats and things like that. So we've done some big project stories in the past, but not at the depth or level that we're doing in this class. So it'll be exciting to build out that section by the end of the semester with some of your work. Is your work published in a publication that gets a lot of traffic. So I hope you enjoyed this. Do get ready. Email me if you have any questions or aren't sure, of the game you're covering. If you're covering a high school game, it can be your alma mater. I'm fine with that. But again, no cheering in the press box. You can't cheer for your alma mater. And have fun with it. It's a great experience. So if you're going to cover something at UIC, you can try reaching out to the sports information director to get a media credential. Tell them you're associated with my class and you want to come over and cover, soccer or whatever sport is in season. And ask the sports information office first to get you a credential so you can come to the game and cover it. Then you get press box space and things like that. So. Anyway, email me if you have any questions. Again, I'm traveling, but I'm always on my phone. So if I'm not in a training session, I'll be happy to answer your question right away. So good luck and get out there and do some great work. And then we'll see you in week 4. Take care, everybody.